This is Quicktake. I'm Madison Mills.
And I'm Scarlet. The week leading up to Pro Bowl is usually fairly quiet for the National Football League, but not this year. On Monday, GOAT quarterback Tom Brady announced his retirement. On Tuesday, former Miami Dolphins coach Brian Flores filed a blockbuster discrimination lawsuit against the league. On Wednesday, after years of protest and outcry, the NFL franchise representing the nation's capital announced its new name.
So how will this week's slew of events affect the league heading into Super Bowl 56 and, of course, beyond? Joining us to break things down is Aaron Schatz, founder and editor-in-chief of Football Outsiders. Aaron, thanks so much for joining us. Let's start off with perhaps the biggest news of the week, the Flores suit. Which allegation should the NFL be more concerned with? Is it Flores' charge that he was fired for not tanking games per the owner's wishes, or that clubs like the Giants were just checking the box when they interviewed him for their head coach job?
Well, I would like to see the league pay more attention to the issue of black head coaches and why we don't have more black head coaches, and were teams just ticking boxes instead of bringing in African Americans for serious interviews. My guess is that what's going to be taken more seriously is going to be the allegation of Miami's owner, Stephen Ross, trying to pay his coach to tank games, because, you know, anything that feeds into competitive balance and the question of whether the games are real, especially given the legalization of sports gambling in so many states and the expansion of sports gambling, like anything that questions whether games are on the up and up is going to get a lot of attention from the league.
Right. It feels more urgent because there's so much more at stake for so many for a broader audience overall. But I want to go back to that point about the Rooney Rule, in which the clubs need to interview at least 2 minority candidates for these head coach jobs as well as other coaching jobs. On that front, the NFL has actually regressed because there's only one active black NFL coach now, which is less than the 2 that were in place when the Rooney Rule was implemented in 2003. And this is, of course, happening in a league where 70% of the NFL players are black. What it seems to me is that there's like a revolving door of head coaches, the same old names available whenever there's an open position, and they just kind of recycle through these same names. And I see it in sports like hockey, too. The same names keep coming and going. Why is it so hard for any sport to break beyond the small group of insiders?
I actually think that's less of a problem than you might think, because the hot thing now is to get a hot young coordinator, in particular an offensive coordinator, to take over your team. So each time we go through coach hirings, there are a lot of new young names. The problem is there aren't a lot of black offensive coordinators, so there aren't a lot of black coaches among those hot young names. So, you know, you have someone like Kevin O'Connell, who is alleged to be the choice of the Minnesota Vikings. They can't officially hire him until the Rams season is over because he's currently the Rams quarterback coach, but he's like a young, prominent offensive mind. And that's the kind of guy who's getting hired now, not old retreads. The problem is there aren't a lot of young, black, prominent offensive minds either. And the ones that there are, such as Byron Leftwich from Tampa Bay or Eric Bieniemy from Kansas City, are not getting enough interviews.
All right. Well, since you mentioned it, of course, I've got to go to Tampa here. My family is all in Tampa in mourning over Tom Brady retiring. Where do the Bucs go from here? It seems unlikely that they'd be able to scoop up an Aaron Rodgers, but can we still, have a lot of Bucs pride in our family moving forward? What does that start to look like?
Well, I mean, flags fly forever. So they're never going to take away the Super Bowl championship from 2 years ago. There's no question there's still going to be talent in Tampa Bay, but they were already going to run into some salary cap issues for next year. So there's no question that there's going to be a bit of a talent drain. Now, that division is very easy looking right now, with the Saints having lost their head coach, and the Panthers are sort of in disarray, and the Falcons aren't very good. So if they pick up a quarterback in free agency, Tampa Bay can definitely be competitive next year, but they are not going to be Super Bowl contenders.
Is Tom Brady's retirement good for the sport of football? I mean, obviously, he's generated so much goodwill in New England and Florida, as Maddie's family can attest to. But at the same time, him staying there kind of prevented the next generation of quarterbacks from really breaking out, even though we did see Mahomes and Allen play some incredible games during this playoff season.
I don't think that it really prevented the next generation from breaking out. I think the next generation, a lot of those quarterbacks have made a name for themselves. So I think it is bad for the league for Brady to retire because the fact is he brings good stories, and good stories bring high viewership. But he decided that the time had come to spend more time with his family. And normally that phrase is a load of malarkey. But this time I happen to believe that it's true, because when you're 44, it might be time to stop playing football.
Well, you bring up the kind of product that is the NFL, and that I've got to go back to the Flores situation, because if the game itself is kind of tainted, it feels like that's a huge issue for the NFL moving forward. I mean, what does the NFL need to do in the next, week or so we have heading into the Super Bowl in terms of like the PR of handling this?
Oh, I don't think they can do anything in the next week to help the PR. I mean, the response that they gave already was a legal response, saying that there were no grounds for the lawsuit. It was not a PR response. In the long run, they're going to do PR on this. But what they need to do is look into whether there are ways to prevent teams from tanking. And that may mean some kind of alternative for deciding on draft order, so that draft order is not simply decided by the worst team getting the first pick, but something more complicated, such as a draft lottery used in other sports to try to prevent teams from tanking.
Got it. I want to ask as well on your thoughts on the new Washington football team's name. It's now the Commanders, and this took a lot of time for this to happen. And not all the fans in Washington are on board with this. In fact, a lot of them say it sounds kind of corporate-y. What's your take on how critical it was for Washington to come up with a team name that's marketable and lives up to, I guess, the love that many people had for the previous name, even though it was a slur?
I mean, look, in the long run, people who are fans of Washington's team are going to remain fans of Washington's team. Nobody is fans of an NFL team because they like the nickname. They're fans of the NFL team usually because they come from that city or because they fall in love with specific players who play for that team. So I don't think that the Washington team being called the Commanders really means anything. It doesn't sound to me like it's a great choice to sell a bunch of memorabilia, but they could have gone with some things that, had more of a historic angle. But at the same time, it's possible that they couldn't, get the URL rights, the trademark rights for some of those names. And this is the best name that they could get all the rights to. So I think in the long run, we're all just going to get used to it. And what matters for Washington fans is that if the team is from Washington, not that the team is the Commanders.
Well said. Really appreciate your joining us today. Aaron Schatz, founder and editor-in-chief of Football Outsiders. Before we let you go, though, Aaron, I just want to get a quick thought from you in terms of what you think is going to happen with the Super Bowl. What's going to be the most exciting part of the game?
I think that the Rams' offense is the best part of the game. As good as the Bengals' offense has been, the Rams' offense has been better. The Bengals, it's a nice story, the close wins that they've gotten to get here, but the Rams were the better team throughout the season, and I think the Rams are properly favored in this game.
Okay, we'll look for the Rams and Stafford to lead them. Thank you so much. Aaron Schatz, founder and editor-in-chief of Football Outsiders.